Hello everyone. Let me introduce myself. My name is Fernando Arya Mulyadi, and here I am now going to presenting about a summary of a journal that I have read and searched that is about a methodology for a refactoring ORM-based monolithic web application into microservices, and which this journal is made by the three author name I have written in below presentation. The first one is Francisco Freiras, Andre Ferreira, and Jacome Kundha. Okay, so the first question that popped up in mind is what is this journal is about? So this journal contains an explanation about an experiment that has been conducted by the three author I have mentioned previously, about to migrate an application based on monolithic architecture into microservice, and a tools that boost the process of the migration and how it actually works. So there's a question about what is microservice and monolith architecture. These two design or an architecture is an application architecture, but what it actually is, an application architecture is a concept, a design or an approach on how a software should be developed, how a software should be designed. And nowadays there are two mainly popular architecture, such as the monolith architecture and the microservice architecture. Monolith architecture are an old but still often used by software engineers and developers nowadays. And monolith architecture are a concept where a software design in which all components of the application are tightly integrated into a single unified unit, hence the name the monolith. And monolith architecture are a software that are designed so that all the components, all the business logic, the data access is all packed into one big package or one application. And it has a popular downside characteristic that whenever you need a change in your application, however small or big it is, you actually need to redeploy the whole application instead of the only service you need to change. And so because of that, this type of architecture mostly used for a lightweight application or easy to set up application. Whenever it grows even bigger or larger, it's harder to maintain and you actually need to really deploy all this stuff, so it takes a lot of effort and people doesn't like to do it, and hence why people trying to migrate from the monolith to the microservices. And microservice is the opposite of monolith architecture, where it breaks down an application into smaller independent services where each service is responsible for a specific business function. And this is very fit for the large and complex application because each service is standing independently. But even though they are independently, each service still able to communicate to each other. And one of the main characteristic and advantage of the microservice is that whenever there is an error or there is a sudden change on one specific service, you only need to redeploy that specific service that you have changed, and it doesn't affect on other services. So you don't actually have to deploy the whole application because it will take a lot of time and effort, especially if your application is a big data, big application and complex business services. It will take a lot of time. But with this architecture, you only need to change and redeploy the services that you actually need to change. And whenever there is an error in your one of your services, the whole application will still be running perfectly fine, but only those services that are unable to run. And so what is a micro refactor tool? A micro refactor tool is a tool that the author used to help boost the process of migration from monolith to microservice architecture. But what these tools actually do, it helps us to uh, automatically migrate a source code of a of a monolith architecture to a microservice architecture. So normally when we migrate from monolith to microservice, it will take a lot of time, it will take a lot of effort, because changing the structure code and all the method, all the classes, and then separate it into each service, it will take a lot of time, that it could even take months. But with these tools, it goes so fast, and it doesn't take months or years or weeks, and it's actually easy to use, since we only need to give or input an source code from the monolithic architecture, and it will run immediately and return a source code that is already refactored into the microservice architecture type format. And unfortunately, this tool has a limitation where it only builds specifically for the Java programming language that uses Spring Framework and the ORM, and it unable to refactor source code with other framework. And so how these tools actually work? It works by doing these three structure steps. The first one is the information extraction, the second one is database refactoring, and then the third one is code refactoring. And what the step of information extraction, the tools in this step, the tools begin by analyzing the source code of the monolithic application. It identifies class dependencies, method invocation, and the structure of the application. It creates an abstract syntax tree, or called AST, and represent the code start the extraction process and understanding how each class interacts within the monolith. So in the information extraction, the tools actually analyze each classes, it analyzes each dependencies, each method invocation, and how the monolith structure in that application. And so it analyzes each services, each classes, and the structure itself of the monolith source code. And then in the second step, there is database refactoring. In these steps, the tools identifies entities and relationship between them using annotation like one-to-many and many-to-one, and then refactors the relationship to ensure that the data can flow properly between the microservices. The tool applies the data transfer object, or the DTO pattern. So in this step, they refactor or analyze each database or an entities, which is also called a table in the database. It checks the each entities or each table that need to use in the code, and then the relationship between them, like using annotation one-to-many, so one entities relate to another many entities, or many entities can relate to one entities. And there's also a DTO, a data transfer object, where it's basically a way so that each service communicate the same data type, the same object. And then in the third step, there is code refactoring. In this step, the tools restructure the original code into separate microservices. It analyzes method invocation that span across multiple classes and ensures these methods are refactored to use REST APIs for inter-service communication. And the experiment was a success. From a 120 open source Java application, 72% of them are successfully refactored into a microservice architecture. It has been tested and run, and it functioned just like the way it was in monolith architecture. And a few percentage where the source code did not refactor is mainly because there are missing classes and there are missing dependencies on the source code, so it failed to refactor the code from the monolith into a microservice. And so that is mostly what the summary of the journal that I have read. Thank you everyone for listening, and goodbye.